I don't know if you can relate, but every year when it comes to setting up for January, I feel like I've spent all of my creative energy just setting up new journals, and then I get to setting up the monthly and I'm like, oh gosh, what am I gonna do here? For this bullet journal setup though, we are going beautifully simple, if I do say so myself, and we're just doing some simple greenery as decoration. I didn't want anything that was going to be too time or labor intensive, but it still needs to look nice, because if my planner doesn't look nice, I'm not going to use it. On this one here though, we are starting on the cover page. I like to use a cover page at the start of each new month, because I just find it makes for a nice divider from one month to another. So we're just putting this kind of leaf design down the side of the page. This one was very much inspired by the Coloring Glutton over on Instagram, and while I'm pretty sure that they used paint markers for theirs because the opacity was very good, I opted to use brush markers because I find them a little more approachable, and also I got rid of all my paint markers, so it's not like I could use them anyway. While the leaves themselves are fairly simple in their design, I find leaves a little bit tricky to draw, so I definitely went in with pencil first, just to make sure that I got the general shape and sizing and positioning of all of them exactly the way I wanted. Or at least close enough that I was like, yep, okay, we'll call it a day. As said, I opted to use brush markers for this one. I'm just using the Tombow dual brush markers, and the colours in particular that I've used are listed in the description box below, along with any other materials. To add to the little leaves, I also put in some little sprigs of these kind of yellow sticks with balls on the end of them. I don't know a lot about plants, but it still looks cute. I thought it was cool. And it was also in the original design by Colette, the Coloring Glutton. And then of course, when I came to erase the ever so helpful pencil lines, I smudged the yellow that I just put down on the page. Thankfully this wasn't the end of the world, we could just stick a little white sticker over the top of it. Previous Jess would have been devastated, current Jess is only mildly annoyed. Now if you've seen my previous video about my planning system for 2024, you might be a little bit confused as to why I keep saying monthly setup, because technically speaking, this isn't a monthly setup. Well haha, it was just to trick everybody that hadn't seen that video, because yes, technically speaking, in 2024, I am no longer doing monthly planning. Instead, I'm opting for 4-week blocks, so almost a month, and I'm calling these cycles. I just find that this fits a little bit better with how I see time. I don't really like that months cut off weeks halfway through, because a lot of systems and routines that I have in my life are very much tied to the weeks, so if a month cuts off the week halfway through, it kind of throws me off a little bit. For that reason, the calendar that I'm drawing on this page only has 4 weeks, so spanning from the 1st of January to the 28th. I also didn't want to title the page as January because it doesn't actually have all of January in it, so instead I opted to call this Cycle 1. If you wanted to hear more about the planning system that I'm using in 2024, we do have that separate video, but the long story short of it is that instead of monthly, I'm going to be doing cyclic. Instead of yearly, I'm really focusing on quarterly, and instead of weekly, despite the fact that a lot of my systems are set up on a kind of weekly basis, I'm going with fortnightly planning instead. Fortnightly here meaning every 2 weeks, so what some people might call bi-weekly, but for me, bi-weekly means twice a week, and fortnightly means every 2 weeks. More on that in a bit, but the calendar that I'm setting up here isn't so much going to be used for events or event planning, but more so for keeping track of my time blocks and how I'm spending my time each day. I like to split my day into 5 time blocks, which are each about 2 hours long, and in using those time blocks, I can effectively make myself a daily schedule of the stuff that I want to get done. What I do want to get better at though is keeping track of how that time actually looks compared to what I plan to do. So on this calendar, I'm going to be recording the actual use of those time blocks across the 4 weeks. Putting the daily initials in for the calendar section, and before we get too much further into it, I just wanted to have a look back at how December was going. For December, I ended up keeping the monthly planning, even though I had kind of already decided that it wasn't really going to be for me, but I did use the month to start implementing some of the things I knew I wanted to try in 2024. In particular, that was taking out a lot of monthly layouts like habit trackers, meal plans, that kind of thing, and putting them instead on fortnightly overviews. For December, I was still including my reflection pages as part of the monthly setup, whereas in my current journal, I've moved these so that they're all together at the front. While the 2024 ideas layout isn't one that I'm going to be needing in January, something I will be keeping on with is my daily planning. This has been working super well for me, and I'm really pleased with how I've developed it across 2023, so I'm going to be carrying that forward. Of course, at the time of filming this one, it isn't quite January yet, we do have some of December still left, and I've got plenty of space in that journal to round out the month. Onto the left hand side of the layout though, and here we're putting in a collection that I've been using for many moons, and that is the actions list. This is effectively a place to hold all of the tasks or to-dos that I have related to my goals for this cycle in particular. These actions get pulled out of my goal planning and put onto this list because I've specifically decided that I want to work on them during this period of time. To make it so that this layout matches with the one that we've already set up, I of course had to put in some more of that greenery decoration, and also used some craft paper for the header. I do kind of wish that I made the craft paper on one side kind of match up better with the craft paper on the other, but it doesn't really bother me enough to pull it up and rearrange it. In terms of the actual structure of the layout though, I'm leaving this one fairly open because at this stage I haven't set my goals for next year. Once those goals have been set and planned and I know what action steps each of them have, then I can pull across the ones that are relevant to this cycle in particular. Depending on how many goals I end up going with, I might end up sectioning out the page into those separate goals so that I can hold all of the related tasks together, or I'll just keep it as a long-running list. It also depends on what type of action steps I have, so are they one-off, or are they weekly, or are they daily things that I want to do. In terms of timing, from first touch of the pen to final erasings, the cover page took about 25 minutes, and the actions list took about 8.5, but these times don't include idea generation time or sketching in time, so a little bit longer for the total time taken. Flipping on over though, and then typically we'd be getting into some monthly setups like meal planner, habit tracker, self-care log, that kind of thing. But as mentioned, for 2024, I want to bring all of these across into fortnightly overviews. One of the big issues that I often have with monthly trackers is just not turning back to them, so I'm trying to combat this by putting it somewhere that I'm going to be using a little more often. Because the fortnightly plans are where I'm going to be putting in things like my events, my work schedule, any kind of releases that we have for the channel, I'm going to be working on those pages a lot more than I would typically be working on some kind of like monthly tracker. By having those monthly tracking elements as part of the fortnightly pages, I'm going to be more likely to actually see them and thus use them. So effectively, I want to take everything that I would typically set up as part of a monthly setup with like a monthly calendar kind of basis and convert that more into a fortnightly basis and put it all on the same layout. To set this one up though, the first thing I'm going in with is some boxes for each of the days of the fortnight. So 14 boxes for each of those 14 days, where each of those boxes are 5.5 centimeters across and 4.5 centimeters down. Each box is also getting a little header where I can write in what day it's for, but with that size of boxes, we also have a little bit of extra room on the spread. The remaining smaller box I have is going to be used to house any notes that I have from that fortnight. So as we're going through the fortnight, if anything comes up that I want to take note of, I can jot it down in there. Rather than having smaller boxes along the very right hand side of the spread, I decided to combine these ones together and put it there as a running task list. When it comes to what I'm actually going to be recording in each of these daily boxes, as said, I don't have a monthly calendar for this setup, or not one where I'm going to be housing events. Instead, the events are going to be going in these daily boxes, along with any content releases that I have, and also my plans for those time blocks that I mentioned before. I intentionally sized the boxes so that I would have enough space for 5 of those time blocks, and specifying what I'm going to use each one for, and then also some additional room to write in any of those other things, be them events or releases, whatever else is going on. I don't typically use these boxes for tasks, but there is technically enough space that I could put some in if I needed to. You'll have seen that I cut away the top section of the right hand page, and that's because I'm turning this layout into a Dutch door. As said, I wanted to combine everything that I would usually do monthly onto this fortnightly overview. So that includes my habit tracking, my meal logging, and my meal planning. Those weren't going to fit on this spread here, so I wanted to have an additional spread that I could put all of those tracking pieces. We'll be setting that one up after this one, but first I had to go in and color in the headers and also label them, and of course label them incorrectly. Somehow I missed the 5th of January, so I went straight from Thursday the 4th to the supposed date of Friday the 6th, but rather than going in and trying to fix those numbers, once I'd realized my mistake, which was when I got to Sunday, the supposed 8th, I just labeled the next box as Monday the 8th, which was correct, and continued on. What more so matters is that I have the correct day of the week in the box rather than the date specifically, though I could go back in at some stage and use those little white sticker labels to fix the mistakes if I wanted to. If you're worried about making mistakes in your bullet journal, I can completely understand that, but also it's good to have some little fixes in your back pocket to kind of take away some of that anxiousness that comes with a new journal setup. We do have a separate video on like 28 ways that you can fix journal mistakes. but I often find that fixing the mistake draws more attention to it, and if you know what you meant, it doesn't really matter. To add some visual interest to the boxes, and also just to differentiate between separate entries, I went and highlighted every second line using Tombow 990. Using a super light Tombow to do these every second line highlights is literally one of my favorite things. I love how it looks. But now as the first spread of the layout is set up, we can flip on over to the second half, making sure that that little piece of paper that was left behind when making the Dutch door is very secure on the page. I didn't want it pulling up and getting in the way, but I also like to leave that little piece there because then you don't have to run the risk of ruining the binding of your notebook by cutting the Dutch door too close to the spine. Previously, I didn't like to have these there. I thought that it looked kind of ugly, and while I wouldn't say that it looks particularly nice, I also just don't really mind it being there anymore. I think that's growth. Starting off with some decoration on this page though, I'm just mimicking the greenery that we have on the other side. I didn't put in any effort to try and make it look completely symmetrical, otherwise I would have been here all day umming and ahhing about, ooh, is this leaf a little bit too tall or whatnot. The thing that I like about a leaves and botanicals theme is that botanicals are organic, like they are kind of weird shapes. They don't all have to look the same. Yes, I did still pencil them in first because I still want them to look nice, but I tried not to be too particular about them. And I'm a pretty particular person, so that's saying a lot. Once the decoration was in though, then it was time to add in the boxes. Now as said, I'm bringing all of the trackers that I would typically do across into this layout. So in particular, that's really my habit tracker and my meal log. As part of my meal log, I also like to have a meal plan, mainly so I can see how not so great I am at eating the meals that I plan for myself. But I also wanted to include a leisure log because I know that one of my goals next year is going to be getting more leisure time in, or kind of bringing some more work-life balance to my life. And I also wanted a space to outline the videos that I'm making for the channel and any other content that I'm releasing, in particular for my memberships. That's a few different spaces, so having a look at the structure of this one, the meal log and meal plan in particular is going in the top left section, so those 4 separate blocks that we have in the top left, and then also the top left of the right hand page. So 1 box for each of breakfast, lunch, dinner and snacks, and then an additional box for the meal plan. In the bottom left of the layout, this is where my habit tracker is going to be, in that smaller kind of box in the corner. The one beside this is where I'm going to be setting my high bar and low bar for each of those habits. We talk about this more in my video about how I'm approaching my habits in 2024, but in general for each of my habits I'm setting myself a low bar, which is something super easy, very entry level for the habit, and then the high bar, which is more akin to the actual completion that I would like to be achieving. By having that very easy, very entry-level version of my habit though, I'm more likely to keep up with my habits because I don't see them as being super daunting tasks. I'll be outlining the high and low bar in that box on the bottom right of the left-hand page, but then when it comes to the right-hand page, the 2 sections on the very right are for those content pieces, so YouTube versus memberships. And then the leftover box in the bottom left of that right hand page, that's going to be the leisure log, or where I write down what I did that was leisurely during the day, hoping that I have at least something to write down for every day of the fortnight. On this spread of the layout, I didn't put in those horizontal dividing lines in every single box, mainly because it depends on how I'm going to be using those boxes. For instance, if I were to put it in my habit tracker, this is kind of going to distract from the colored dots that I'm going to use to complete the habit tracker, or fill in which habits I did or didn't do. Because I want it to be very easy to see the completion of the habits, I decided to leave those horizontal lines out of there. Whereas for something like the meal log, I want to be able to read across from the initials that are on the very left all the way to the column on the right. Those horizontal lines just make it a little bit easier to see which row corresponds with which day. Similar idea for the content boxes. I didn't put the highlights in those because of how I'm going to be using them, but I did put it in for the leisure log because I want to easily see one day differentiated with another. In terms of timing, from first touch of the pen to final erasings, this layout as a whole, so both sides of the Dutch door, took about 55 minutes. Considering it does go across 4 pages though, or 2 spreads, I'm not really too worried about the time taken. And I know that because this was the first time I was setting it up and it is a fairly new layout for me, I'm only going to get faster as I do it more. That being said though, I do only set up the first fortnight for the year in this one, because I want to give myself the opportunity to reflect on the layout come the end of the fortnight, and just make sure that everything's actually working the way I intend it to. This is one of the main reasons that I like to set things up as I go, rather than all at once, when it comes to like weekly setups and stuff like that, just because our circumstances and situations change, and with that so do our needs. Maybe at the end of 2 weeks I won't need a leisure log anymore. I highly doubt it, but maybe. I know it's probably a little bit difficult to appreciate how I'm going to be using these layouts without actually seeing it. So at the start of 2024, I'm planning on doing a little kind of 1 week in my journal, maybe a 1 fortnightly check-in type thing. So if that sounds interesting to you, if you want to see how this new planning system works, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel so that you don't miss out. Having a look at the layouts that we have though, we have the actions list and the cycle 1 cover page. Then following this, we're straight on into the fortnightly planning with the overview of what's happening for each of the days of the fortnight, and then all of my tracking pages. After this is where I'm going to be putting my daily logs, so I have plenty of space for those, and then once those are wrapped up, we'll set up for the next fortnight. In the meantime, if you want to hear more about how my new planning system is going to work, then this video is the next one to check out. In that one, I go through how I'm breaking down my planning system into different increments of time, and all of the journals that I'm going to be using. So click or tap on that one, and I'll see you over there.